Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War news update, the first part thereof for the, 29th of October 2023. I would not normally be at rugby with my boy for his training. It is hammering it down, so I'm going to be much more timely with my output today. Just before I do start, something that someone told me, not for the first time as well, this has been said a number of times throughout the last year. Lots of people complain they don't get notifications of my channel. One of the hints is if you go to someone's channel that you want to subscribe to and you want their notifications for sure, and you press on the subscribed button, the kind of arrow, the drop down menu, if you go to all instead of personalized, I believe that will help. If it's on personalized, it may give you a bit of a kickback on that, or may not do exactly what you want. So make sure it's got all selected. Right. Moving to where we normally start, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Couple of things to say about this. Obviously, all the caveats to these claims are in my description. You can find that below. There has been a lot of rain, I think, over the last few days, although I think the weather is looking fairly good going forward. That will have affected maneuvers in terms of the rain itself and the mud, but also in terms of visibility and drone, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance activity. So that is one thing. The second thing is there could be a dip because it's the weekend. That sometimes happens, but not all the time. It's a bit weird. Okay, 660 personnel lost is in the middle of the range that we've seen over the last few months. 8 tanks, 9 APVs, and 8 artillery systems are at the lower end. 8 tanks is still fairly meaningful losses though, but for the other two categories, we've certainly seen higher more consistently recently. And then we have no MLRS or anti-aircraft warfare system losses, 3 cruise missiles. That's not last night, but the night before. 8 vehicles and fuel tanks and 1 piece of special equipment. So that is what we have from the general staff. Let's now see what Andrew Perpetua has to say. What's really cool about Andrew Perpetua is he's fast becoming over the year and a half, he's become a real prominent figure in the OSINT community. When you've got established journalists like Michael Weiss saying, now that Oryx is gone, it's okay, we've still got Andrew Perpetua and showing these sort of figures, then, you know, that's really good for Andrew. And really happy that he works so hard at this. Goodness me, I mean, it must be everything he does all day. Also, it's worth knowing what Andrew Perpetua here says. There are losses. Oh, I think Oryx is still operating. The Oryx website is still producing the output. So I'm not 100% sure what's going on with Oryx. Anyway, these are the losses I could identify today, says Perpetua. The weather has been crap for several days, although today was nicer. And most videos getting posted are compilations of old footage. So that's always worth bearing in mind when looking at stuff. Here again we have a 4-to-1 ratio probably of Russian losses to Ukrainian losses. The Ukrainian losses, that as we can see, are fairly standard, although there is a Leopard to a 4 thrown in there and a Striker, that although much less in terms of equipment losses, far fewer pieces lost, there are still some high value pieces in there. The Russians have a number of tanks, a spread of T-80s, T-72s, but not too many, only 3, and then a couple of engineering ones. UR-77, that's a mine-clearing vehicle, if I'm right, and a EOV. Also an air defense system, another Strela 10 lost today, or over the last 24 hours. And then IFVs and APCs, MRAPs and whatnot. So usual kind of spread of other vehicles. I guess that's still, you know, a much greater loss in terms of Russian to Ukrainian, but then it depends what you start with and your percentage of losses of what you have. Oops, I've already looked through that. So, and I'm not going to show you too much footage, to be honest. There is this bit of footage I was going to dip into. I can't really show you all of it. There are there's a bunch of equipment going through what looks like, I have a feeling this must be like frosty ground for it to have this effect. So you've got mine clearers going through at the front, and you have two lines of vehicles that are being looked at here, that are being peppered with artillery, and these present themselves as really very much sitting targets. You've got artillery going off very close, and you've got two lines coming in there. Now, what happens throughout this video is not an awful lot. If you see, there's broadly most vehicles and people seem to be okay. Now, in my books, that should be absolutely target central. That should be littered with artillery. And the fact that that isn't littered with artillery, but it is being watched and it is being hit with some artillery, shows that the Ukrainians know that they're there, but they just don't have enough to be able to take out those targets. So that's, I think, tells you a little bit of a story about possibly how much ammunition the Ukrainians don't have, and we'll go back onto that in the military aid segment in the second video. This is Tim White saying, previously on October the 28th, so yesterday, another fairly young executive in Russia seems about to die. The head of Rosmerekflot, Zachary Geoev, is just 46. Yet, whenever I do this, by the way, I have tons of people going, actually, this is how you pronounce it? Love it. Thank you for your help. Yesterday, he suffered a heart attack and now multiple organ failure. Rosmerekflot controls ship navigation and operated the Kerch crossing to occupy Crimea. We have a situation where I don't know the details here, but I guess there could be rationale for this being something that the Ukrainian special forces are behind, or it could be the Russian FSB. You just don't know. As Tim White later says, pieces of the jigsaw starting to fit together. Earlier, I posted the story of another dying young executive, thanks to Amara Graps, for finding this link showing he was heavily involved in Ukraine's stolen grain. So I'm not going to click on that and look into the details, but here's a chap that, as I say, the Ukrainians might have good rationale for taking out. So that could be that they are behind that. Right, not too much, to be honest, fairly quiet day. So we're moving on to the strikes, distant strikes already. And we have a total of 5 out of 5 Shaheeds being shot down last night. That's 100% ratio, which is, again, a good interception rate. Additionally, a Kh-59 was launched. That supposedly fell in the Poltava region, but Ukrainian officials say there were no serious consequences to that. So this is another night of very low numbers of aerial threats sent into Ukraine, again probably sounding out the Ukrainian air defenses and radar systems and whatnot rather than anything else. And as I keep saying, expect to see some huge waves in the near distant future. Explosions reported in occupied Crimea. There have been reports of explosions near Chornomorska in Russian-occupied Crimea, according to the Telegram channel Crimean Wind late last night. So I think there have been a number of places that have been hit that we haven't actually heard too much detail about, like Belbek Airport, for example, airbase, and other places up and down the occupied regions. I'm fairly sure the Ukrainians have a decent enough stock of ATACMS now. I don't know whether they are at the front or not, but I put money on them having decent stocks of them. They have been given a green light by the US, and the US, once they've given the green light officially, generally don't dilly-dally when it comes to getting stuff to the Ukrainians, so I'm pretty sure they'll be there. We know that they had 28 ATACMS originally, or we're pretty sure, and we heard of the strikes on that first ATACMS strike night at the two airports, Luhansk and Berdyansk, and then it kind of went quiet, and then we did hear of another place being hit, where there were claims that there were 3 S-400 launchers, another claim it was a military training base. But these aren't being telegraphed, they aren't being signposted hugely by either side. So I don't know whether there are and have been more ATACMS hits, whether they're happening on a consistent basis, whether this strike in Crimea is an ATACMS strike. I just don't know. It just seems to be quite difficult to get hold of information coming out of some of these places. Last night at 3:20 local time in the Afipsky oil refinery, Krasnodar region, a fire occurred. Locals report that they heard the sound of lawnmowers. The refinery was a target of drones. Previously it has been, so this is doing the rounds at the moment. There are quite a few bits of footage concerning the fire. The Russians claim they put it out quite quickly. I don't know how significant the damage was, but certainly an oil refinery has been targeted again by Ukrainian drones. So that's that. And then really that's it for Distant Hits, and we're moving on to other bits and pieces already. It's, as I say, relatively quiet news day. Ukrainian special services cannot yet confirm the information about the alleged death of Putin. I reported this yesterday and said that I shied away from reporting it the previous 2 days because it was just rumour, and it still is just rumour. But it's one of these rumours, a bit like with Budanov, that the longer it goes on and you don't see the person involved, the more you think, well, it could be true. And this is how it is with Putin. The longer he doesn't pop out and say, hello, I'm alive, the longer one can stew on these rumours and think that they are possibly more credible. Anyway, I love the wording of this. Ukrainian special services cannot yet confirm the information about the alleged death of Putin. Andrei Yusov, the representative of the MDI, Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, stated this, quote, Ukrainians should be restrained in reacting to such things. Of course, we all want this event to happen as soon as possible, but still better after the tribunal. However, it is not worth learning this from anonymous Russian sources, Yusov said. It could just be Russian psyops, or it could just be rumor mongers that have no connection to reality, or it could be true. We just don't know, but anyway, I thought I'd relay that to you. Now, this is something Ukraine are doing that I think is pretty sensible. It's rather similar to the Russian use of penal Storm Z units in the army. But instead of sending those prisoners to their ultimate demise, the Ukrainians here are getting the prisoners to be involved in working mines. So as a large proportion of the male population is sent to war and involved in the defense of the nation, there will be a lack of workers around. So according to the minister, this way the labor shortage is being filled, so that's good. The prisoners, and this is what I like about it as well, prisoners themselves are gaining skills that will help them find employment in the future. They also receive a decent salary, which allows them to pay compensation for the damage caused by the crime, pay taxes, and fill the budget special fund. This is really good. Like, all of that makes sense. It's not just about, right, we need boots on the ground in the armed forces, so let's fill those boots with convicts and then kill them effectively, and we won't have to pay for their rehabilitation and incarceration, and we have fresh meat for the meat grinder. This is a little bit more refined and looks eminently sensible to me, and these guys do a job quite literally, but also it ticks a number of other boxes too. In Dagestan, so this is a kind of Muslim region of Russia. I would have thought it's an ethnic region. Settlers are mythical, but the roundup was real. So what's happened here? Roundup was held on immigrants from Israel, except these immigrants didn't exist. A crowd of young people began to inspect the hotels in which Israeli refugees were allegedly accommodated. After no one was found, the youth announced that the Jews were hidden. And in another Caucasian subject of the Russian Federation, Karachay-Cherkessia, a rally was held demanding the expulsion of ethnic Jews from the Republic. The Middle Ages, but with nuclear missiles. This is really sad, actually, that we're moving into a renewed period of anti-Semitism. Now, I know because I've done videos on this, and I just did a live interview yesterday on my friend's channel. I know that the whole Israel-Palestine conflict is a right hot mess with no easy answer, but one must be very careful not to be prejudiced against the entire peoples of either side, right? This is nuanced, and one must be nuanced, and this kind of activity isn't indeed nuanced, sadly. Right. Yeah, just live fact checking myself. So 83% of Dagestanis are Muslim, according to Wikipedia, Islamic, 2.4% Russian Orthodox, 2% Caucasian folk religions and other native faiths, and 1% are non-denominational Christians. In addition, 9% of the population identify as spiritual but not religious, 2% as atheist, and 0.6% as other, and no answer. So that gives you the religious makeup of Dagestanis, in case you were wondering. Hashtag just checking. Russia intensifies attacks in Ukraine while the world isn't looking. So this is Michael Clark. I've got a lot of time for Michael Clark. Does a lot of analysis on Sky News. Don't know if he still does now that we're a year and a half into the war. But anyway, here's a Times article, which I'm able to access without using funky means. Now, it talks about how Russia have been upping the ante across the front lines, as we've seen as of late, as the Ukrainian offensive seems to have ground to a halt. He talks about the risk of a stalemate. He says Ukraine's situation is better than stalemate because they are inflicting heavy losses on Russian forces in their recent attacks. In 10 days from October the 10th, Russia's visually verified vehicle losses in Avdiivka were 109, comprising tanks, fighting vehicles and support units, more than the full brigade's worth. So as we've looked into, it's more than likely somewhere between 200 and 400 vehicles. In the past week, its losses have not diminished, and Russian personnel losses are running several hundred a day. The Russians are still operating human wave attacks and with their convicts and inexperienced troops. Ukraine is also inflicting heavy losses south of Orikhiv in the Zaporizhia region, where Ukraine has been trying to break through to Tokmak and open the route to the coast, splitting Russian forces in two. That now looks unlikely, but the Russians have used up their reserves in holding on north of Tokmak. They are certainly stretched, and Kyiv may still be hoping that Russian defences will prove brittle in the rear areas if only they can break through more of the forward defence lines. And I think this is generally accurate here. Ukraine has also been very successful in degrading Russian forces in the rear areas with its Western-supplied deep strike precision missiles and artillery. They've created conditions that will make it difficult for Russian forces to settle safely into winter quarters. Crimea under threat. So the Ukrainians will certainly keep fighting, particularly when the wet weather gives way to freezing ground and heavy vehicles can disperse off the roads again. If Kyiv can cope with current Russian pressure in the Donbass, then the immediate strategic prize, not far away now, is to get within easy missile range or artillery range of Crimea. This would make it too dangerous for the Russians to use Crimea as a military hub, feeding troops and air power into the battlefields of Ukraine. It would make it an unenviable home for the 800,000 Russians who have moved in since 2014, and it would be a major setback for Putin to see the pride and joy of his Novorossiya, that's New Russia, under such threat. With only two slender land routes connecting Crimea to the rest of Ukraine and one vulnerable bridge over the Kerch Strait linking it to Russia, Crimea is inherently vulnerable if the Ukrainians get much closer to it. Absolutely. And then the war of attrition, the ending here. So that also makes the current situation worse than a stalemate for the Ukrainians. This is now a war of attrition of the sort Western powers have not seen since the world wars of the last century. Wars of attrition are ultimately won by the side that can best gear up its industries and apply its productive capacity directly to the battlefield, from high-end cyber systems down to bullets, boots and meals ready to eat. Okay, this goes back to what I was talking about yesterday. So first of all, it's understanding that the deepest pockets win wars. And as far as the deepest pockets goes, Russia have not got tremendously deep pockets. They've gone through half their reserves. Their economy is just about to tank. Now, the same can be said for Ukraine, but the Ukraine has the backing of NATO, EU, and all its allies, whereas Russia really has to rely on places like Iran. Yeah, not so great. China, possibly, but China are facing issues of their own and are reticent to support Russia so overtly. We've got North Korea in terms of artillery ammunition, but I don't know how sustainable that would be going forward. Yeah, they've got big stockpiles of them, but as far as production goes, that's maybe not on the cards. Now, it therefore comes down to production capacities. So Ukraine can rely on Western nations, and it is also ramping up its indigenous production. But as I said yesterday, with its ports effectively hamstrung by the Russians. They are unable to produce at levels that they would need, really. So whatever the situation is, whatever you think it is, they will have to rely on Western assistance going forward. That is absolutely the case in whatever scenario you think plays out here. As Clark says, the Russians can eventually do this for themselves. The Ukrainians can do some of this for themselves and are gearing up for a high production arms industry in the future, but they can only match Russia in any real war of attrition with Western support. Absolutely. Particularly next year, when Russia will be heavily dependent on what it can squeeze from North Korea, Iran, and China. 100%. Western leaders naturally recoil from the idea that the struggle between crude Russian imperialism and liberal democracy can be won only in an attritional way. They want to see Ukrainian forces achieve the sort of battlefield victories Western forces enjoyed at times over the past 70 years, such as the Falklands or the First Gulf War in 1991. But this summer indicates that it is unlikely to go that way. Kiev is fearful that what happens at a coke and chemical plant or a sand quarry near Avdiivka may convince Western observers, when they glance back from the Middle East, that an attritional war has begun. They fear that the West's nerve will fail and 2024 will become Ukraine's toughest test yet. Interesting, and a bit of a reality shock, for a wake-up call possibly for some people. I think it is tough for Ukraine at the moment, definitely, in terms of what's going on geopolitically around the world. I think Israel-Palestine doesn't help one iota, although there may be a silver lining in terms of even the US striking Iranian targets. They've struck them in Syria, as I mentioned previously. If Israel and the US can incapacitate Iran, then it could take them out of the equation in terms of supporting Israel. But of course, that's getting dangerously close to a third world war. Supporting Russia, sorry. So there are so many ramifications that come out of these geopolitical situations that at first glance don't benefit Ukraine. So we'll keep on hoping that Western nations recognize this and recognize the need to continue focusing on helping Ukraine and assisting them in their righteous war against Russia. Anyway, that's enough from me for the first part. Please like, subscribe, and share. Do change that subscribe option to all rather than personalized, and I think that might help if that's something that concerns you. Anyway, take care. Toodle pips.